Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Stories with me, Jesse. Today's episode is a request from viewer Bonnie Scott, who suggested that we visit the stories of people who have been scammed or ripped off over at Reddit/a-holetax. Let me know what you think of these stories in the comments, and feel free to provide your own suggestions for anything I should feature in a future installment. Better prepare yourself, and be sure to read the fine print, because we're getting started now. Our first story is titled, Dealership Tried to Scam Me on My Car and Gets What's Coming. About a week ago, I was in the market for a new car. I already had a 4-year-old car, so the plan was to trade in my old car and roll over the equity into the new one. I searched online and found the exact car that I wanted, so I called the dealership and scheduled a time for a test drive. After the test drive, we began discussing the financial terms of the new car loan. Always go to dealerships pre-approved. And also the trade-in amount for my old car. Going into my trade-in, I did my homework. I found out that the fair market price for my car was $10,000 private party and around $8,000 on a trade-in. The dealership ran their numbers and came back to me with an offer of $6,400. On the evaluation, they put the lowest trim and options on my old car, while also putting that the car was in fair condition instead of good or excellent, which I can honestly attest to. Obviously, I put up a fight with the offer, and eventually the sales manager came out to explain the low offer, citing COVID-19, his mother's gallbladder, and a bunch of other excuses. I really wanted the new car, so I sucked it up and decided to move forward, as I was still able to roll over a few $1,000s towards the new car. At last, the contract signing comes around, and I get put with this smooth-talking finance guy who attempted to upsell me on a bunch of useless warranties that were exorbitantly priced. When I was finally able to look at the contract, the pricing for my trade-in was listed as $7,200, not $6,400. I verify with the finance guy, and he confirmed the $7,200 price. I sign, he signs, and the documents are processed. A few moments pass, and from the other room I hear him talking to the sales manager about how the car pricing was wrong on the contract, $800 in my favor. From what I overheard, they listed their internal price on the contract, meaning all the things they told me previously was complete bullshit, and they were trying to stiff me. The finance guy comes back to me and says that the contract was void because the pricing was wrong, and that we'll have to fill out a new set of documents. Immediately I knew he was full of shit. In college, I took an extensive legal contracts course taught by an attorney, and the one thing that was beat into our heads was the requirement for two parties to make a contract legal, and that it also takes both parties to void a contract. The dealership f***ed up and then tried to trick me into voiding the contract. I simply refused and cited the legal requirements to void a contract. The finance guy then began to argue with me, saying how it wasn't fair to the dealership that I was getting more money for my car, and how I should do the right thing, meaning that I should just bend over and let them rip me off on my trade-in. Obviously, I refused, and the dealership had no choice but to let me go on my merry way, in my new car with $800 more in my pocket. TLDR. Dealership tried to rip me off on my car trade-in and ended up giving me an additional $800 because of their own incompetence. How utterly embarrassing that must have been for that greedy dealership, having already undercut the gentleman looking for the trade-in. This just goes to show you that doing your homework is definitely a smart move. After this kind of treatment, I'd probably go somewhere else in the future, but at least this guy was able to leave with a little bit of satisfaction. Moving on, our next story is called The A-Hole Discount. When I was in high school, I worked as a cashier at a grocery store in a pretty affluent neighborhood. This meant that there was the occasional encounter with miserable, entitled middle-aged Karens projecting the stress and inner torment of their own midlife crises onto me before they go home and engulf the Chardonnay and chocolate I just scanned for them. The store I worked at had a senior discount day on Thursdays, which happened to be one of the days that I worked. One day, I had a woman come through my line who was probably in her mid-50s. She wasn't senior old yet, but she was definitely getting there. She didn't respond to my hello, which I don't really care about anyways. After I scanned her things, I started scanning the stack of coupons she brought, many of which were expired and wouldn't work. I explained this to her politely, but she wasn't having any of it. In the most awful, nasal, and patronizing voice, she starts going on a rant about how
"It shouldn't matter. I just got the coupons. And isn't there a way you can just take it off yourself?"
My response to that was, of course, no. in the most polite way I could. She seemed to accept defeat, but she wasn't done trying to make someone's day as bad as hers. She tells me how stupid it is that we have Halloween candy out in late November. It was on clearance, and how much better the other stores in the city were because they
Wouldn't do things like this.
all while angrily referring to the store I was in as you. As if I was the person in control of these things. She was almost done complaining when I remembered it was Thursday. I immediately typed the code in, and the words "senior discount 10% appear on the screen in front of her. Upon seeing this, her expression very quickly changed from that of a smug, entitled narcissist to someone entering the throes of an existential crisis. She turned red in the face as she put her card in and went to grab her cart. I wished her a nice evening, and she left without saying a word. Moral of the story: if you want to exact revenge on a Karen, make them feel old. Man, I wouldn't have graced that woman with a discount, but the reaction you got was probably worth its weight in gold. I wish I could have tried something similar with my old customers. Oh, you're here for the F you discount? Well, here you go. F you. Our next story is titled, Literal Absentee DIY Landlord Tries to Screw Me Over. Loses everything he tried to gain from me. Once upon a time, when I was young and single and found myself flush with a surplus of cash, I decided to embark upon single male living and found a townhouse for rent in an HOA community that seemed like a pretty decent deal. It was a separate unit with one level that was theoretically ADA, but never got anyone to rent it. It took me 2 full years to figure out why, and it was the worst absentee landlord in the world. He was headed off to Ecuador to live full-time in this weird yoga retreat thing and chase after young Ecuadorian beach bunnies or something. Imagine every greasy, balding, ponytail hippie you ever met, then add complete incompetence to that. And an inherited set of properties that he had slum-lorded as a living, but sold off except for one unit at this HOA, his own place. Landlord had hired the property management company that managed the HOA property, maintenance, groundskeeping, etc., to rent the place, but insisted on doing the paperwork himself. Since I was the first renter he had had for this particular unit, he had lived there previously and was moving to Ecuador. He approved me, had me hand him cash for the cleaning deposit. Warning, warning. Signed paperwork that turned out wasn't the paperwork the management company needed, and then flew to his new home in Ecuador that night. He handed me the key to the townhouse and drove off in a cheap rental car, and the last thing he said to me was, "If there's a problem, I expect you to work it out with the management company. I won't be available for a month or so." At this point, klaxons should have been going off in my head. When I walked into the unit, it was trashed. Like messy frat house moved out trashed. I called his number, then I called the property management company and said, "This isn't cleaned at all." Back and forth went on for a good while, but it was still a house. I should have walked, but I didn't at that point. Eventually, the management company got him to admit he left the unit trashed. I wouldn't move in at all. I was able to show the receipt for the $600 cleaning fee he signed hurriedly for and submit that, so they waived the security deposit they would normally have required and said they would require the landlord to pay it, so it all worked out. 3 months later, a-hole landlord is back in town to pare down his material possessions, i.e., sell shit he left behind. And you wouldn't know it, the water heater in the unit died. I contacted the management company, they contacted him, and he said, "I'll take care of it." He showed up one day, broke the lock getting in. His rationale was that he owned the place so he could break the lock if he wanted to. Without putting 24-hour notice up that he was going to be working on it, I got a call at work from a neighbor and drove home as fast as I could to find a-hole landlord sputtering as the new water heater ruined 2 bookshelves worth of hardback books and rare board games. At that point, I had already called the management company, and they not only had photographs of a-hole landlord's fuck-up, but also took him aside and told him I could prosecute him for criminal trespassing. I was furious, but landlord promised he'd get money from his insurance company to fix everything, and I'd get replacements for my stuff. Guess what never happened? I eventually rebuilt my collection, but at that point I was done with him entirely, and more or less demanded that the property management company be the only ones involved. Oddly enough, they were pretty much on that too. When I decided to move closer to my work, taking me from up to an hour to get home driving by car to less than 5 minutes by bicycle, I was torn because frankly, once I'd figured this a-hole's modus operandum for the rental, I could do pretty much whatever so long as he got his check. He never checked email, so if there was an issue, I went through the management company, and inevitably they just said, go ahead and take care of it, busted appliance, etc., and take it off the rent. He always sent screaming emails threatening to evict me if he didn't get his full rent payment because he had a shitty building. But I was on a long-term lease, 2 years, and had locked in what was then above average pricing for the building, but as it went on was something like 1/3 the rent in my area for my place. The $200 jump in monthly rent was one thing, but if I was honest about everything, saving $200 a month in rent meant I was spending 2 hours a day in traffic and $150 or more in gas. The new place meant I could walk pretty much anywhere. On top of that, dealing with a-hole landlord over the internet for the past 2 years was too much, and I knew he'd try to jack my rent $300 above what the new place was worth the minute that 2 years was up, which was about what I was going to pay for the new place, and the fucker still hadn't given me the money for my books and games that he had ruined. So I made sure to send in the notification exactly on time as per his instructions to the property management company, who, at this point, knew me and knew what was likely to happen when I moved out. And true to form, he did exactly what we all expected him to do. He attempted to claim the cleaning deposit as security, and then said I would have to pay for the damage I caused due to my negligence with the water heater, and pay to have the unit recarpeted. There was no carpet anywhere in the house, because part of the reason he didn't want to pay for cleaning was because he tore up all the carpet from my unit before I moved in, and then decided he could just paint the floor instead. Unfortunately, it was an old hardwood floor and not the subfloor. I had all of his shenanigans documented to a fare thee well. I had a signed document from the landlord, along with a signed letter indicating that it was due to his incompetence, as well as the notification and photographs of the damage he had caused, trying to fix something outside of his experience. I even had a photograph of him with water, spraying him in the face because he tried to solder copper pipe, and when that didn't work, he tried to duct tape it shut. To be clear, I did absolutely no work on his property whatsoever. I called the property management company that he had hired to do all the work, and when he f***ed up installing the water heater in my unit and ruined the carpets, as well as a bunch of my stuff, I called his insurance agency because he was living in Ecuador and couldn't be bothered to deal with his properties other than to collect a rent check. So when he tried to pull his now infamous bullshit, I was able to trot out all the documentation the property management company and I had kept, and I still had a copy of the insurance claim I had filed with the full list of ruined property and the total he signed and dated that he had in fact collected money from. By this time, I had already moved everything out of the unit, except for a cheap old laptop, a folding table, a chair I found in the alleyway, and my cleaning supplies, because I was working from home for a week while packing up my crap and moving out. I sent him an email with the management company CC'd, but also CC'd a friend of mine who worked at a law firm at the time, as the front desk receptionist, but the domain was a well-known law firm in my city, and had handled landlord's divorce once upon a time. The email, in legal terms, but TLDR, said, "So I should send this letter of demand to the insurance company because I'm confused. And as I recall, you still owe me somewhere between $1,000 to $1,200 in personal property damages you never paid due to your mishandling of the water heater installation, and thus the full list of other landlord bullshit. Should I contact your property company and insurance agent as per your standing instructions?" 5 minutes after I sent that email, I got a call from the property management company saying that they would take care of everything from that point on, and that if I hadn't heard from them by Thursday, to expect courier documents on Friday morning. Friday morning, I woke up to a courier hand-delivering me a $4,250 check and an itemized receipt for everything the landlord had tried to screw me over. It included the cleaning fee, but surprisingly also the standard security deposit and the owed money for damages that he had received from the insurance company but never paid me, and a full refund of my last month's rent. I found out about 4 years later that the HOA had a lien on the property for a year, but couldn't start foreclosure until I moved out, so they backdated me and refunded my rent check. Turns out a-hole landlord was pocketing the rent, but hadn't paid utilities or HOA dues for 6 months, which was handled through the property management company. So the HOA foreclosed on the unit, the property management company got 15%, and the place sold for $600K after they hired a condo flipper. I get the impression they were all just sitting there, hovering, waiting for me to hand over the keys to the property management company, and then the minute I was out of the door, they were filing paperwork and lawsuits saying, Go, go, go! Get the renter completely clear of this no liens, no liens! Because if I could have shown that the owner still owed me any money at all, I could theoretically tie up the repo of the unit. A-Hole Landlord tried to sue them, but for some reason didn't want to leave Ecuador. I'd like to imagine it was a warrant for his arrest for insurance fraud, but still. That was quite a long but ultimately rewarding story. After all that poor guy went through with this crappy landlord, he got out from under it in the best way possible. Keeping evidence of instances like these can really do wonders to help you if you're being screwed. And I picture that moron suddenly having less money to be a player in a foreign land, frustrated, and wondering how on earth he's going to screw with people now. I want to give a quick shout out to Bonnie Scott for suggesting that I visit the a-holetax subreddit and invite each of you to let me know what you thought of today's episode. Anyways, that's all the time we have for today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for tuning in with me, Jesse. What did you think of these stories? Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content, and check out what other stories I have for you. Don't get screwed over, but if you have been before, I hope you've gotten some sweet payback. Have a beautiful day, and don't be an a-hole, cause there might just be a tax for that. I'll catch you in the next one.